Welcome to my channel. Today we are going to be making a face mask with a nose flap, and I'm going to show you how to make it striped, like an ace pride flag, for example. Alright gang, you may recall that I have already made a mask tutorial video. However, I've got a new pattern now. This is a little different than the last one. The last one was more pointed like this. I made this new pattern based on the trend I've been seeing lately where people have a little sort of nose flap at the top of their masks. It conforms to the face a little bit better. It helps prevent the gaps of air coming up between your nose and your cheeks. I've seen it advertised as no fog on glasses mask. In my personal experience, shivering at the bus stop, this is not true. My glasses still get fog on them. However, I will concede that I like the flap better. I think it eliminates the need for the nose wire a little bit, and it might help with the fog a little bit. So let's get started. Here I've already cut out my pieces of fabric. I've got 4 pieces here. 2 pieces that are going to be the front of the mask. You can see that these are sort of mirror images of each other, what they look like. I've also got 2 pieces for the lining. You can see, once again, mirror images of each other here. And the lining is a bit shorter than the front mask. You can see that the front mask goes out farther. That's because this is going to be the area where you put like the elastic or the cord or however you feel like securing your masks. So the first thing we're going to do is make sure that our fronts and our linings are lined up with the wrong sides facing out and the right sides together on the inside. So if you notice on this, it's sort of faded on this side. This is the side I'm not going to want to see in the end. On the inside, I have the slightly darker side. This is the side that I'm going to want to be on the outside of the mask eventually. Right now it's getting hidden in here because we're going to sew a line right along here, along this curved edge. What I've got here is mostly a curve, like my original mask. And then when you reach here, this is sort of like goes out a little bit. That's because this part is going to be the part that eventually becomes the nose flap. So like I said, I'm just going to sew a line along this curved edge, and I am giving it a 3/8 inch seam allowance. That's the amount of seam allowance on the little pattern I made. It's pretty important to do that if you're following the pattern exactly. For me anyway, I kind of fit the pattern to my face, so it may actually be different for you. I would suggest experimenting a little bit. You know, you can always make it bigger or smaller depending on how your chin falls and stuff like that. But if I go too close to the edge, the mask ends up bigger than I want, and if the mask is bigger than I want, it's like too big for my face. Alright, so here I have my sewed up front of my mask. You can see now that when I open this up, the outside is all nice and sewn together, and the seam is hidden on the bad side. Now I'm going to do the same thing to my lining piece. So along the curved edge with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. All right, and there's my lining also sewed together at the edge. A little bit of a mishap with the thread, but that's all right because it's getting hidden in the end. Look, see, looks nice and neat on the side that's going to be showing. All right, normally I would do this part on an ironing board, but for demonstration purposes. So what I'm going to do is I am going to iron my seam open. This isn't really a necessary step, it's just something I like to do. Not really sure why. My mom usually does it. I think it's supposed to help prevent the seam from coming apart. Now, the thing about ironing curves is that it's a little bit easier if you sort of cut on the curve. So I'm going to make some little cuts going almost up to, but not cutting through the thread. I don't want to cut through where I sewed. That would defeat the purpose. but just every inch or so I made like a little divot here. And this way, when I iron open my seams, the edges sort of fold over each other and help to maintain that curve. So here I have my nice ironed open front piece. You can see that it sort of naturally forms an arch, and then over here it sort of goes a different direction. This part here is where the front of my face is going to be, like where the tip of my nose is going to be. Now we're going to do the same thing for the lining piece. So I'm going to cut just a few little divots to help iron open the curve. And here we have our beautiful ironed open lining piece as well. Now before we move on, we're going to stick with the lining piece for a second, because what I want to do is put a hem at each of the ends of the lining, the left and the right edges of the lining. I want to hem them in. So we're going to flip over to our ugly side that we're going to eventually hide, the one with the seam showing. We're going to take the edge and we're going to fold it over. All right, and I'm just going to iron that so that it helps stay creased. All right, now I'm going to take this and I'm going to fold it over again. Double fold and iron it. All right, and we're going to do the same thing on the other side. So fold. And fold again. Now what I'm going to do is sew these folds down. So I'm just going to sew a line right here on the fold, right here on this fold. And sometimes your bobbin runs out of thread and it jams up the machine and you rip your fabric, but it's okay because this is getting hidden anyway. Haha! Isn't that great? Anyway, here you can see the front of my lining. Very nice, clean middle. The sides, I've got a line up on each side where the lining is. On the wrong side, I've got my seam, my folded over fabric. What we're going to do now is we're going to sew our outside piece and our lining piece together. So once again, we want our right side, the side that we're going to eventually want, on the inside of the little sandwich you're going to make between them. Right? So you can see I've got the wrong side of the lining on the outside here. I've got the wrong side of the lining on the outside on this. And we're just going to line them up. I like to use the little seams I made going down the middle. And just pin that in place. We're going to do that on the other side as well. The bottom of the mask, line up the seams and pin them together. And if you want, you can go ahead and pin the edges as well, the top edge or so and so. I think I'll just stick one on each end and on the bottom as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew along the top here, just sort of where the lining is. I'm not really going to bother with this extra part of the outside fabric. Just a line along the top, 3/8 seam allowance, and also a line along the bottom, 3/8 seam allowance. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. I accidentally went a little bit larger than 3/8 on the top edge just now, so I'm gonna redo it. So I just seam ripped it out real quick. And you know what? Actually, since this part is going to be the nose flap part, maybe I'll even go a little less than 3/8 instead of more. Give myself a tiny bit more nose flap room. since it's going to get folded in on the end, it's not really going to matter if it's closer to the edge. It'll give me a longer flap, but it won't be higher on my face. It won't be bumping into my eyes. All right, so here we go. I've got my lining sewed to the top of the front piece. I've got it sewed on the bottom. And there are 2 gaps here because this lining part is going to become like a filter pocket. So this is also where we're going to turn it inside out. And just to help flatten this out, I'm going to go ahead and sort of iron this flat a little bit. Right, look at that. Nice and flat, huh? Well, this part's obviously curved, but we want that. Everything's really coming together. So the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna get that nose flap crease in there. It's pretty clear where the crease is. If you recall the pattern, it went like this part went off. This is where we're gonna fold it. So I'm just going to go right here and fold it in. Might be easier to do it from the other side. You can see where the divot is. Should be like a whole inch or so all the way down. And we're just going to iron it flat to help it stay creased properly. All right, so we've got our little nose flap all creased here. It's just folded over. And this should be about an inch. We're in the home stretch now. What we're gonna do is we're going to make our little pockets for our cords. So on the side here, much like we did with the lining, we're gonna fold this edge over just a little bit. And I'm just gonna iron that down. All right, and then I'm gonna take this and instead of folding it just a tiny little bit over like we did with the lining, I'm gonna fold it all the way over here until it meets the edge where the lining is. So just pick this up so you can see. All right, so we've got our edge here. Our lining edge is all the way over here, and we are going to fold this all the way over so that it lines up right next to the lining. It's not overlapping it, it's just right next to it. All right, and then much like we sewed a little line, together, we're just going to sew a little line, sewing this together, and we're going to keep our stitch line as close to this edge as possible because we want there to be a lot of room over here for us to be able to put elastics and stuff like that in there. So it ends up looking something like this. Simple, right? I'm just gonna do the same thing on the other side. Flap down. Fold the hem in once. Fold the hem in a second time. Sew it closed along the edge. And here is our sewn mask. Looks pretty good, right? You can fold right in half. Nice and compact. And this little flap here comes up. So we're just gonna add our cords or our elastics over here. Something I always like to do on my masks is have an actual cord. I just use shoelaces. That's because as an essential worker, I'm wearing the mask for hours at a time, and the elastics, you know, they really start to hurt your ears after a while. So having the cord is nice, and I like to wear headbands with buttons on the sides so that I can hook the cord over the buttons and try to keep the pressure off my ears. They still end up hurting at the end of the day because of my glasses and the string, and it's just like a lot of pressure, but I think it's better than wearing the elastics. Plus, I think that I found that when I tie the cords around my head, I get a tighter fit with the mask than I do with elastics. Elastics are a little looser, a little more prone to slipping down, a little more prone to gaping at the sides. They're just not as secure. They are still good though, so which is why I'm also going to include elastics. This is my elastic. It's only about 22 centimeters. And a little trick that I've figured out is if I just use a bobby pin, I can thread one end of the elastic through the bobby pin like that to help me get it through the channel. Then I stick the bobby pin through. Carrying the end of the elastic with it. And then I can just tie a little knot here. Don't need to do any fancy sewing for this part. Just a simple double knot. And we like twist the elastic so that the knot is hidden inside of the mask. I'll hide it at the bottom actually. And there you go, you got an elastic on there. All right, I might want to wash that before I go putting it on, so I'm going to demonstrate the finished product with another mask I made using the same cut. This nice red one here. So basically, I've got the flap part, can come up. That goes right over my nose. So you can see this goes over my nose here, and it sort of naturally folds in on itself again. So this will sort of conform to my nose shape this way. And if I peel this down a little bit, you can see where it starts to fold under itself. And it helps prevent air from escaping in this little gap like it does with the other ones that don't have this fold part. It's also helpful for the glasses. It helps to keep them up. The other ones, if I have them wear the masks, especially if they're thick, they're always sort of slipping down, but this way there's like a nice little ridge to sort of catch them. It's not perfect, but it's better than it was for sure. Something that I find useful about the elastics also, like I said, I tend to wear them with the tie because it's tighter. I feel like it's more secure when I'm working for hours on end at work. And I usually have a headband with like buttons on it that I put the string over instead of having it straight on my ear. But let me show you where the elastic really comes in handy. And I know some people prefer the elastic also because they don't want to have to tie the whole thing. They think it takes too long when you're just going to be wearing the mask for a short while if you're not going to be wearing it for ages. So when I'm at work, I wear these masks, I have them tied. But when I go to lunch, obviously I take the mask off so I can eat. Now when I come back from lunch, a lot of the time I haven't actually finished drinking my tea yet. So I have my little travel mug of tea. And if I have to tie and untie my mask every time I want to take a sip of tea, that's really obnoxious. That's like too much trouble. But then what? I just leave the mask off. So I'm going around maskless the entire time I'm working and every now and then I'm sipping my tea? No, that's also ridiculous. So it's really great to have the elastics because then I can just have the mask on, and this is a little bit more loose than tying the cord, I think, but it's pretty good. You know, I don't think it's really gapey. Like a lot of those accordion fold masks, I've tried them. They're nice and all, but I do feel like they tend to gape on the sides. So this is a bit looser. It's a bit more likely to just sort of fall down, I think. Which is why as soon as I'm done with my tea, I go back to tying it the cord way. But this is very useful for if I'm working and I'm drinking tea, because I can just quick on and off. And especially when I use a slightly thicker material like this red or like the zigzag green one that I have here. It really helps where the seam is because I have it curved here. This also helps me to breathe. I know some people were complaining that their masks are like too far on their nose. It's getting crushed and you can't breathe and it's hard. This way it kind of creates a nice little divot here where like my nostrils can suck in air, which is great for me like working in the city. You're just like going up and down stairs all the time. You start to breathe heavy. It's really good to be able to breathe in the mask. All right, I already cut this up because I was doing it and then I realized I wasn't recording. All right, so now we're going to show you how to jazz it up. I'm going to make a pride flag version of a mask, you know, so with stripes. I'm going to make the asexual pride flag, which has 4 stripes. So basically, you take your pattern, right? Now remember that this part, this is going to be the nose flap, right? So don't worry about that. You don't want to count that part, only counting this part because that's the part that's going to be visible. Go ahead and divide this into however many stripes you want. Ta-da! This looks really big, but that's because this part is not going to be visible in the end, so there's a 4th stripe there. This part, the bottom, I actually made a little bit bigger than the others. That's because I realized the last time that I made one, the romantic pride flag mask I made, the bottom stripe kind of tucks under your chin a little bit, and so it sort of ends up looking smaller than the others, so I made it bigger than the others to compensate for that. So we're going to cut out our different colors along these little patterns, 4 different colors. Now, because this is just a pattern that I cut here, this doesn't have the seam allowance on it. So this end piece here, I'm going to cut it flush on all these ends. But when I come to this end, I'm going to make sure that I'm leaving a little extra fabric for my seam allowance. With the middle pieces, I'm going to cut flush here on the short ends, but on both ends, I'm going to leave 3/8 inch seam allowance on the fabric. Alright, so obviously my little eyeballed seam allowance lines are not perfect, but that's alright. It's getting sewed together, who cares? So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew all these little stripes together. So I'm just going to take my pattern off. I'm going to separate my halves, and now I'm going to sew the stripes together. So what I'm going to do, like take this gray and black one for example, I'll do that first, is I want the wrong sides to be together. I mean, the right sides to be together on the inside, and the wrong sides to be facing out. And I'm just gonna sew that together. All right, same thing here. We've got the right sides together and sew them. Okay, last one. Right side of the white, right side of the purple. Right, and there you go. Here's all the wrong sides when you flip it over. All the right sides look a nice, clean half, huh? And we're gonna do the same thing with these. And here I've got my 2 front halves. All right, now just for my own peace of mind, I think that instead of having all this raggedy back of this fabric, even if it is going to be going against the lining later, I think I want it to not be like that, to be kind of smooth. So I'm just going to go ahead and add an extra layer where I'm going to attach it to these white outside piece sized pieces. And No, not to do anything fancy with this one because all the things are going to get hidden when we attach it to the lining anyway. So I'm not even gonna bother trying to like do a fancy like right sides together kind of flip it inside out thing. I'm literally just going to line these up and sew as close to the edge as possible as I can. And there you go. We've got two lovely little asexual pride flag fronts. From there, basically, you just put this mask together, same as the other mask, using these as the front. You know, you got your lining, and there you go. And for anyone who wanted to see it, here is the finished product Ace Pride Flag face mask. I hope you guys liked this video. I will, of course, put my mask pattern in the description so that you can download it yourself and try this out.